Welcome to the Abyssinian Syllabary, where we spell out Ethiopia in 33 characters. I'm Yves-Marie Stranger, your host and the compiler of these Abyssinian lives. Nota bene, while any resemblance to actual countries, past or present, and to historical figures is not purely coincidental, this is a work of fiction. For a primer on these Ethiopian characters, newcomers may start with the prologue by Manuel de Guèz. To order the book or a poster of the Abyssinian Syllabary, visit uthiopia.com. That's uthiopia.com. In order to trace a straight furrow, one should forget both the hand that grasps the stilt, the grunt of the oxen, as well as the ard itself and the rutted earth. Such is the essence of life, which evaporates as soon as you would hold it too close. The Apocrypha of Zereacob, Brancaleone. Ch. Leone was a wastrel from his very first years, which he ill spent in rapine and many acts of skullduggery in the taverns of Florence. He was born during a lull in the war between the Black and the White Guelphs, and, as the paroxysms of violence smouldered under the guttered houses, it was a good time for tricksters and all forms of thievery, which was fortunate for Leone, as he was a scoundrel, and not a very brave one either. Defenestration and throttling had become so commonplace in Florence in those times that ground-floor rents had tripled in price, and soothsayers peddled copper necklaces as foolproof artificers against the exactions of the garroter. Leone's father did not trade in charms, was himself a swindler. As a baker, he had no hesitation in debasing his wheat with chestnut and acorn flour. From this chicanery, Leone acquired a lifelong dislike of blended foodstuffs, and was to persist to the very end of his natural existence in desisting from partaking of any food not prepared in his own kitchens, nor was he ever to accept living quarters that were to be reached by a flight of stairs. This was to later prove itself convenient, as in Ethiopia all foods are unsophisticated and houses are built of a piece. His father apprenticed him to a plasterer, for whom Leone was compelled the length of the day to mix the limes and the ochre with water, coloured sands, and mineral salts. He did not much like this, as it cracked his skin in winter and skinned his fingers in the summer. When he was 22 years of age, Leone took advantage of the uprising against the Pope to rally one of the rabbles, despoiling the countryside in these times of disquiet. Without any fear of retribution, they ambushed merchants and farmers, bludgeoning them and relieving them of their coinage, all the while mindful of instructing them to mend their wicked ways, so they should go to heaven rather than to hell. Leone was not by nature vicious, although he did enjoy agonizing these poor folks with chosen insults. Still, Leone whacked the buggers, similar to his rough comrades, and grew fat on these larcenies, much as the other brigands. Once order was restored, the Pope's men flushed into the Campagna, disemboweling and quartering these petty ruffians, so that Leone trussed himself like a baker woman, stealing for this purpose his mother's aprons, and disappeared in a cloud of flour. Beardless and of rosy cheeks, Leone reached Rome in a few weeks, where he found a trade, once more plastering, in the Pope's palaces, which he had been so industrious in pillaging not much more than a month beforehand. Scaling unsound scaffolding, Leone spent his days applying coloured pastes to trompe-l'œil terraces in gardens dotted with yew trees. Leone promptly tired of these new decors. He made for the Holy Land, nothing less, with a cohort of guildsmen of all trades, mandated by the Pope to touch up the frescoes of a Jerusalem monastery. The Turk fed them victuals too hot for the palate, and in which one could not make out the ingredients. Leone felt his fates beckoning him once again. He was tired of frescoes, of white plaster, and red spices. Leone was sent with a few of his workmates to the port of Rash to give a new shine to the Naib's fort. He saw here an opportunity, so that Leone stole away in the night on a borrowed felucca with 8 of his compagni, craftsmen, such as himself, 2 Genoese, 1 Catalan, and 3 Venetian. They baptized themselves the Sanguinoso of the Eritrean Sea, but these fierce buccaneers, having overlooked drinking waters, comestibles, as well as the small matter of sails, were nabbed as they drifted in front of Jeddah. They were promptly handed over to the Ottoman overlord of this city, who placed them in leg irons for petty larceny. Leone and his gang broke out of the jail 2 weeks later. This time they did not overlook water or sails, and, tacking into the wind post-haste, they reached the African coast in 2 nights and 1 day. Here they scuttled their rowboat in 3 fathoms of water. The raw fish people, penurious troglodytes who roam naked in these parts, brought them landwards. Once up in the hills, herders attired in straw rain hats led them forward. The kings of these parts rove far and wide, and they are very difficult to find, so that first they fried these buccaneers, then they shivered. They became very despondent. 52 days later they were a sorry sight, rake-thin and beset by sores, as they stood all a-quiver in front of the King of Kings. This king asked of them by the mouth of his dragoman what truck they had with him and his kingdom, and, as Leone's answer made him laugh, that he knew of bread, and that he was a good baker, the king allowed Leone to add that he was a plasterer and a maker of frescoes too. The king failed to well comprehend these details, so that he said to Leone, "That it was good. You shall make many portraits of me." Leone, never one to allow a dearth of knowledge to limit his prospects, set to work with zeal. He now lived large, in a tent of white linen, he who loathed storied houses. He took the slave he had been given to bear water as a wife, before willingly converting to orthodoxy, though he always refused the cotton thread that the faithful knot around their neck. He even preferred to allay suspicions to have tattooed on his forehead a graceless cross, which was not much worse than the ungainly icons that he churned out for the King of Kings and his many churches. Leone paints from memory, with the colours he carries about his person in horns. He paints the portraits of the Florence of his youth, and, in particular, an image of the Christ crowned with thorns. If a work inscribed in his own name has to this day not been located, his thorned Ensues, in countless variations, is an icon still found in churches throughout Ethiopia. And this is how Leone, a star-crossed pirate and an indifferent painter, had a decisive influence. Leone died under canvas in a peripatetic camp, and was buried in an unhallowed tomb by his sceptical neighbours. At the very last, his daughter, whom he had christened Beatrice, even though she was very saturnine, insisted in knotting around his neck the necklace of the believers, so that in death Leone lay garroted at last.